So the Canadian government has tried pretty much everything at this point to try to fix Canadian real estate prices via regulations, taxes, penalties, new laws, etc. And in this video, I'm going to go over why none of that has worked and why it will never work. I'm that agent Kelly. I talk about Canadian real estate, my local market of Abbotsford and the Fraser Valley. And if you're into that, subscribe to the channel, like this video. And if you want to chat one-on-one, I have a link in my description where you can book yourself right into my calendar. So in the last basically 20 years, the government has tried everything to try to fix the pricing of Canadian real estate. They've always often gone after the demand side of the supply and demand equation. They think, hey, if we implement this new law or this new tax and we stifle the demand, then prices will stop going up at a certain point. But the reality of it is supply and demand is a naturally occurring thing. It's going to do whatever it does. It's always going to find a way to properly price the product in any given market or any given environment. And essentially what happens when you add in some new law or something like that that stifles demand in one area, it's almost like playing whack-a-mole, where it's like you cover this problem and then that problem just resurfaces over here. It's essentially the same problem, just wearing a different mask. And the reason why that is we have what you would call a free market, which is just supply and demand. And when you try to artificially or synthetically control how the dynamics of supply and demand, like I said before, sure, you're getting rid of this one problem, but then it's just going to resurface over here as some other problem. And I guess the way I can explain this is this might be a roundabout, ridiculous way of explaining this, but supply and demand has been around since before humans have been around. It's like trying to disturb a natural ecosystem. You're going to have unintended consequences somewhere else down the road, right? So before humans were even here, it's almost like a universal law, right? There was a natural balance of rabbits to coyotes, right? And if there's too many rabbits, they're going to eat all of the vegetation in the area and completely destroy the environment. On the other hand, if there's too many rabbits, it makes it really easy for coyotes to prosper because they have so many rabbits to hunt. It's really easy for them to catch these rabbits and eat and prosper. Therefore, they start having more babies. The coyote population starts growing. And eventually there's so many coyotes that are hunting these rabbits that it becomes way too easy to kill and eat the rabbits. And then the population of rabbits starts lessening. And then eventually there's too many coyotes that the coyotes start starving to death. Their population decreases. Then the rabbit population increases. And that's basically supply and demand in our natural ecosystem here in the wild, right? And that's essentially how our market works. If I have too many rabbits sneaking into my backyard and eating my strawberries and carrots that I'm trying to grow or whatever, I can't just throw 200 coyotes into my backyard without unintended consequences that could quite possibly be much worse than the initial rabbit problem that I was having. I just kind of have to let things run the course, and sure, rabbits are going to come eat my vegetables every once in a while, but that's how it is. And maybe that's a bad example, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? I can't just throw 200 coyotes into the forest and hope that there aren't going to be unintended consequences from doing that. So here's a good example of this, right? So right now, the government's trying to basically ban Airbnb. And they think there's going to be no repercussions from doing this. They just think, well, if we do that, there's going to be more rentals. And honestly, I don't think that they even think that. I just think that they know that will get them votes if they say they're going to do that. And the general public has no idea how supply and demand works. And they're going to think, yeah, let's get rid of Airbnb. What a sick idea. But the reality of it is if the demand is there for Airbnb, people are renting out their Airbnbs, no problem. It's profitable. They're making money. It's not like everybody's losing their shirts on these Airbnbs. And by the way, if they were, a lot of people would just stop doing Airbnb and we'd have a lot less of them. So the demand for Airbnb is there. So what do you think is going to happen when they completely take away the supply of them? What's likely going to happen is hotels are going to start making a lot more money. So what you'll likely see is now we have, no supply of short-term rentals. And what will likely happen is you'll see hotels now competing with residential developers to buy up land so they can build hotels on that land instead of places for people to live. Or you'll have right now in a detached home with a basement suite, everybody's renting those out to long-term tenants. Well, if the demand for short-term rental is extremely high or stays the same as what it is right now, and we take away all the supply, what do you think everyone's going to do with their basement suites? They're just going to Airbnb them because they'll make triple the money. And then all of the basement suites that you could have rented as a long-term tenant are now off the market and they're being rented as short-term rentals. But that's just one example, right? You guys see how by trying to artificially screw around with the economy and the naturally occurring way of things, there's going to be more problems somewhere else. You can't just completely remove demand or completely remove supply and not have an issue resurface somewhere else. And in my opinion, everything that they've done, we would have just been way better off without it if they just never even did it in the first place. I guarantee you prices, rents, everything would be lower if they just left it alone. Rent control is another perfect example of a policy that they brought in that in the short term sounds great on paper and looks amazing for tenants on paper, but over the long term as indefinitely pushed up the prices of rents and has steepened the trajectory of which they go up. Yeah, in the short term, and if you're a tenant, it does benefit you, absolutely. But over the long term, 10, 15 years, if you were to stay a tenant 10 years from now, your rent is going to be substantially higher than it otherwise would have been if rent control was just never put in place in the first place, because what it does is it constricts supply. Landlords don't want to be landlords if they can't bump up the rent. Landlords will sell their rental units if the tenant is paying substantially under market rent. You're screwing around with the supply side of that equation. There will indefinitely be an issue down the line from doing that. Just like how I can inject a whole bunch of testosterone and get super jacked and whatever, but because I'm synthetically messing around with the natural way that my body works, there's going to be side effects to that, right? It's a natural, I guess, ecosystem. Anytime you synthetically screw around with something that's just naturally occurring, there's going to be unintended consequences to that. So that's my opinion on that. I believe the government should just stay out of it, and maybe you disagree with me, but if you don't, subscribe, like the video. I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.